Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of your favorite Mad Men podcast. Made Man. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to talk about episode 7 of the first season, Red in the Face. I just finished it a few minutes ago, and grabbed my phone, ran outside. I don't know if you can hear all the crickets going off in the air, but it's a cool September night, and come on, buddy. My dog's at the door, so I'm gonna go out with him. Come on, let's go together. You go to the bathroom, I'll talk about Mad Men. So, anyway, episode 7, Red in the Face. This episode had a lot to do with Roger. Roger Sterling was a big part of this episode, and you didn't like him all that much. You weren't really a huge fan. My dog is really just walking away. I need to follow him. You saw some flaws. I mean, obviously you saw some flaws in an older episode because he cheats on his wife with Joan, the secretary. But you saw more flaws in him tonight. The whole episode kind of revolved around Roger this time around. His wife and his kid are out of town. His girlfriend is going out of town with her friend. So Roger is alone. And you can kind of tell that Roger does not like to be alone. So Dawn invites him to dinner. At first he's like, I don't know, but then he accepts. And of course they go out this is while they're out drinking, for a nightcap after dinner, after work. And Roger sees some young women, and he likes getting their eye. And he makes some comment about, oh, look at them, before turning 30, they still have some life in their eyes, or something like that. So you can see he's kind of, I don't want to say he's a broken man, but you can see he's disenchanted, I would think, with his family, his wife and his kids. Which is why, he obviously cheats on her in the first place. So Dawn ends up inviting them back to the house. This wasn't part of the plan, so Betty doesn't have anything for him to eat. But you see he's eating a nice steak. Dawn is eating a nice steak, and Betty's eating a salad. So the three of them are talking, but of course Betty gives up her dinner just so that Roger can have dinner. And I mean, they talk, and they drink, and they smoke, and they drink, and they smoke, and they drink, and they smoke. And they just keep doing this. There's no such thing as drunk driving. I mean, literally, no one cares. There's no designated driver. No one thinks about these things. And Dawn's going to go get more booze, and Roger goes up, and he kind of puts the moves on Betty. He gets a little too close to her while she's doing the dishes. He brushes up, kind of holds her, gets really close in his face, very creepy, and says, I'll be thinking about you tonight. Dawn doesn't really see it, but he can kind of tell when he walks in that everyone's a little awkward. He obviously sends, this is at this point, Roger's like, I'm going to go home. And it was kind of funny because he's heading out to the car. He's like, no, that's my car over there. They don't show this. We just see Dawn, like, oh, that's your car. Be careful. Hey, turn your lights on. That's kind of their way of saying, hey, just get home safe. That's how you did it. You drank, you drove carefully. There was no such thing as quote unquote drunk driving, or at least it wasn't seen as a thing, at least in the 60s. I'm sure guys died all the time from drunk driving. But it wasn't the, like, I don't want to say the stigma. It wasn't the, like, known thing, like, you really shouldn't do this, at least back then. That's how it seemed. And Dawn was actually pissed. He talked to Betty like, what the hell was that? He grabbed her by the arm a little forcefully. She's like, you gonna have me bounce up against the walls, off the walls like that? And you could see he doesn't hit her or anything like that, but he was a little too forceful for my liking, for anyone's liking. Just he felt something was wrong, and he blamed her because she laughed at his jokes and talked and was friendly with him during the dinner. He blamed her, which is the shitty way of going about things. But the next day in the office, Roger comes in, gives him another drink, like, hey, this makes up for all the booze we drank, basically. And he talks about how he has his name on a building. He feels entitled. One day he went to a building, went up in, tried to get in, put his key in the door. He couldn't get in. And sometimes he just, tries to go into the wrong building, basically. He feels like he can do that, or sometimes it happens. His way of kind of acknowledging that he did try to put a move on his wife, and he apologizes, but without actually saying anything. And Don was like, yeah, okay, sure. But you can see that Don wasn't crazy about it. Didn't just accept his apology, no problem, because he's one of the bosses. I thought, and I guess I'm wrong, I thought there was a picture where the older guy said, you're bound, look at you in this photo, like I had you on my knee. He's Cooper, he's Sterling, they're Sterling Cooper. I thought that was his dad, but I guess it's not. It's just an older guy. I don't know. I'm guessing maybe Roger's dad was a Sterling, and that's how Sterling Cooper started, and Roger took over. I don't know all these things yet. I don't think I've missed anything. I wonder if we'll learn more. If this guy is not Sterling Roger's dad, but maybe we'll talk about Roger's dad. I don't know. But I'm bouncing around here, and that's fine. I'm going to try to cover everything. There was some interesting talk of Roger. Great acting, by the way. Just kick-ass acting. Talking about some experience he had in the war. Don doesn't really talk much about it. They were talking about. It was funny. Roger said, the way you drop your G's. I thought maybe you were from the city, from the country, like grew up on a farm or something. And Don just quickly changed the subject. He does not like to talk about his past because, well, technically Don Draper doesn't have a past. We all know that now. God, what else happened in this episode? The episode actually opened with Betty's psychiatrist calling Don to give him the update. Was the Hippocratic Oath not a big thing then? Was there some sort of, like, the man must know? I don't know I wonder if this was a thing, or if they're just kind of showing, like this is a hyper-realistic view of things. But it's like the doctor came out and basically said she kind of has the mind of a child or something. I mean, it was really disrespectful. And, like later on, you see Betty like gets confronted by the divorcee in the grocery store, and then she's like, I found the hair you cut off. What's wrong with you? Betty slapped her. It was wild, to say the least, because people noticed, and it's like I remember watching that going, that is some serial killer stuff, and there's more serial killer stuff that comes up. I will get to that, but that was like weird that it happened in the first place. And now the divorcee found out about it. She called Betty out on it, and I think Betty was embarrassed or whatever. She got pissed and she slapped her. She later, her friend who's pregnant and loves to drink and smoke came over to visit. Came over and she's like, oh, I brought a shirt for you. She's like, oh, this is not my son's shirt. And really, she just came over because she heard that Betty slapped the divorcee, Helen. And they talked a little, and she's like, they blame the Helen, because she's a no good divorcee. She probably she has a job. What's she thinking? Having a job and wearing with that long hair. What's she thinking with that? It's like so catty, ridiculous. The girl's like, my husband brought home jewelry from her store. I wanted to throw it in his face. She probably loved seeing him in there. It's like, shut up. Nobody. I don't think. Not everybody cares as much about these things as you do, as that woman does. I mean, at least that's what I like to think. Helen has enough to do on her own. God, what else is going on? There's so much going on. A lot of drinking, a lot of smoking. I'll get to what the kind of topic in the office was this week, but there's also kind of a side story with Pete. Pete got married. Pete brought in this chip and dip to the office. He said, we got 2 of them. 2 chip and dips. I'm trying to return one of them because we don't need 2. The friends are like, what the hell is this? Like, what is this? And he's like, you put chips in it? You put dip in it. Dip? Like, I don't know. Everything's like, what? This is crazy. Chip and dip? So I don't know if this was a newfangled thing, the chip and dip, but he was adamant. He's like, I have two, going to return one, want to get money for it. This was after he went and had a nice dinner at the Four Seasons with his in-laws, poolside. So he goes to the store, and they're like, I can't give you cash for this. You can only get credit. He's like, he doesn't have a receipt. He doesn't have a receipt. They have to look up his name, look up her name. He runs into a friend of his that was at the wedding, and he was getting his ragged strung. And I know the actor from different shows. He was on The Flash. He was on Raising the Bar, a lawyer show with Zach Morris from Saved by the Bell. That's the character's name, not to be confused with the Morris boys who are listening to this. But he's talking to that guy, and he's like, oh, yeah, the racket restrung, and he's flirting a little with the girl behind the counter, and she's all hee. And I think Pete got jealous that this guy is, I assume, still single and can kind of do whatever he wants. And Pete's there on his lunch, returning a chip and dip. He meets a woman in line. The husband's in advertising. She's like, I don't know your husband. She's like, yeah, probably because you're here doing this kind of stuff. That's why you don't know him. He's off actually working and getting stuff done. So he can't return the chip and dip for cash. He only can get store credit. He buys a .22 rifle. And he thinks he's so cool. He shows it to the guys in the office. Like, look at me with my .22 rifle. He goes outside in the office, and he's just for fun pointing at people in the office. 1960s, that kind of thing is like, you wouldn't even think of that as being something real. You just think, look, I have my gun, I'm showing the office, who cares, big deal. One of the secretaries comes over, and she's like, she takes the gun, and she slowly pushes it down. It's like, you have work to do. She takes the gun from him. And, looking at that now, in the scary world we live in today, ridiculous. Just thinking of this guy with his .22, not even loaded, probably, in the office. And that's kind of where that ends, right? You think, okay, he returned a gift. He got $22 back or whatever it was. He bought a gun for whatever reason. We cut to a shot later in the story, and he's sitting in a chair at his house with the gun in his lap, and he's getting yelled at by Trudy, his wife. You don't see her. You just hear her voice, and she's like, that was a gift from so-and-so. How could you do this? That's so selfish of you. And he's sitting with a gun in his lap. This look in his eyes of like, I'm being emasculated. I feel like I'm being torn down by my wife. I'm a man, I'm being emasculated. And the way she yelled at him, I am guessing that it wasn't a duplicate. It wasn't a copy. Like, you almost felt bad for him. Like, he was returning that thing basically probably because he hated it, and he hated the fact that this was his life. I'm starting to think that. I don't think he likes being married to Trudy. I don't think he likes it at all. Which is crazy, because who wouldn't want to be married to Alison Brie? It's ridiculous. There's another scene that happens with him and the gun, but before I talk about that, I want to go back earlier in the day, and Peggy is working late, and Don's like, don't work too late. I don't want to find you, with your face on the keyboard, or something like, you don't charge us for dinner. Like, it's really just kind of talking down to her. Roger comes over, and he's like, what are you doing? And she's like, oh, I'm just working. And he's like, I'll let you have that one, honey. Like, why would you ever think I'm talking to you? I'm talking to Donald, which was, just Roger showing that, as charming as he can also be a bit of a shit. But they leave. Pete comes over. Pete's still interested in Peggy. And he comes over, and he's like, oh, what are you doing? And I'm doing some copy. He's like, I'll be happy to look at it for you sometime. That'd be great. Cut to later on. She comes to his office, and she's like, I brought some of the copy. Could you look at it? And he's like, yeah. But you could see he was still kind of upset about the whole thing. He brought the gun into the office. She's like, what's that? He's like, oh, it's a wedding gift. Not really, but... and then he goes into this weird serial killer type discussion of what I would like to do. I have a fantasy of shooting an animal, hunting. Because you talked about, have you ever been hunting? I went hunting with my uncle. And we tie it to the bumper and come home. But I have this fantasy of putting it over my shoulder, dragging it out of the woods, bringing it back to my cabin, tying it up, taking a knife. He's like talking about taking the knife, cutting out the loin, bringing it into my woman who's waiting for me, my special gal who's waiting for me in the cabin. She puts it in a pan, she heats it up, and then she gives it to me, and I eat it while she watches. Like it's like the old hunter-gatherer, this is what a man should be, not being yelled at by this woman because he returned a effing chip and dip. This guy who, is respected by his wife and probably respected by his father. This is what this is kind of his fantasy. Not eat dinner with her, but she watches him eat because he provided, he hunted, he gathered. And Peggy looks at him and's like, that would be wonderful. So Peggy still has feelings for this dude. She kind of she left and she was almost like swooning over Pete. So she doesn't see Pete as this guy who slept with her, then got married, and is a creep. She sees this guy as slept with you, still got married, still I have feelings for you. There's something there. Obviously. Peggy, you could just see it. She had to go grab a ham sandwich and a Danish just to get Pete off her mind. The story of the week, as far as in the office, was the Nixon campaign, which has been talked about in previous episodes. The Nixon campaign, this time they're talking about, who could he be running against? There was talk that maybe LBJ might be making a play if Kennedy doesn't go. And old man Cooper's like, it's going to be Kennedy. He doesn't even wear a hat. He's too young. They really weren't worried about Kennedy while dealing with Nixon. And the one thing Pete said was, this guy's, they're basically, he doesn't need a hat. You know who else doesn't wear a hat? Elvis doesn't wear a hat. And Cooper's like, who let this kid in here? Basically, let the grown-ups talk. But what Pete said was absolutely right. That, this guy doesn't wear a hat because he is not the old guard. He's the new guard. Kennedy, just like Elvis was the new guard as far as people were frightened of him, but the crowds loved him, the kids loved him. The same thing happened with Kennedy. The youth loved him. And these old farts don't see that. And these old guys are basically put in charge of Nixon campaign. We all know how that went against Kennedy. So it'll be interesting to see what the repercussions are to the office, to the business, with the fact that obviously if they are the men for this job, they will fail. So before this big meeting with the people from Nixon's campaign, Roger and Don go out for more drinks, and they drink, and they smoke, and they drink, and they smoke, and then they do the most disgusting thing of all. They eat oysters. I got to tell you, okay, I've never had an oyster, but it's like, come over here, give me a little shell, all right? And I'm going to blow my nose in it, okay? Now I want you to eat it. To me, that's what I see when I see an oyster. I've gone out with people who have eaten oysters, and I've watched them eat oysters, and I say, that's great. Thank you. But you see, they're slurping, they're drinking, they're eating, they're smoking, and like more martinis. This is not after work. This is lunch. They're like, let's have one more instead of coffee. They're not going to smell it over their Brill cream anyway, these Nixon folks. They get back to their building, and the elevator is out. They're already late. He's like, want to go back to lunch? And Roger's like, no. So you could see he even was like, this is a big deal, the Nixon campaign. He was not leaving this one behind. They'll wait for me. My name's on the billing. They'll wait for me, but we are going to this. And they climb up 21 flights of stairs, I believe. And Don at one point, Don does it pretty much fine. He's tired, but he's fine. But at one point, he stops to light up a cigarette and smokes on the way up. Why not? He gets up there, he's hacking, he's coughing. I love that they're coughing, and they probably are like, oh, we don't know why. Maybe it's them cleaning out the cleansing tar that's in their lungs. the beautiful cigarettes are giving them. While Don makes it up in one piece, Roger, he had a little bit of a tougher time. He's a little older. He's huffing and puffing. At one point, he slumps over. He's like, "Oh, I dropped my tie clip. Oh, I found it." And he finally gets up there, and he just looks worse for the wear. He looks right at them. They're like, "Hello, everybody. How you doing?" Boom, throws up. The guys, they're all pros. They're like, "Oh, no big deal. Oh, you had oysters. Yeah, clearly you had oysters. We'll get you cleaned up, have a water, we'll meet you back in the office." And that was really it. And Don's like, "You all right?" And he's like, yeah, I'm okay. Don walks away, and there's this smirk on Don's face. And he loved the fact that that Roger is older, Roger is weaker, Roger couldn't hold it, and Roger, couldn't keep it together and threw up. And he liked seeing him uncomfortable. I don't know if that's the end of their rivalry or if this is an ongoing thing, but I think that that's a little payback for him hitting on his wife. And now I'm out of order with this a little bit, but he comes home for dinner. I think that's how the episode ended. But Don comes home for dinner, and Betty's making a roast. And he's like, "A whole roast? It's just me, right?" Basically like, "Oh, were you hoping Roger was going to come again? Because he's not coming." And he just has this dirty look on his face and he walks off. Ooh, I didn't like anybody in this episode. I didn't like Betty for slapping the divorcee. The divorcee is the only one I liked, Helen. She's like, "What is wrong with you giving my 9-year-old son your hair clippings?" That is the most valid argument. We got one guy who has a 22 and talks about chopping up animals so that a woman can feed him. The woman who's listening to him is like, "That sounds great." You got Roger, who's hitting on Betty. You got Betty, who's slapping divorcees, drinking wine. And you got Don, who's grabbing his wife and disrespecting her and mad at her. Everybody's annoying me, except Helen, the divorcee. What I didn't talk about was one thing. Betty and the neighbor talked a little bit, and she was like, I feel like, she talked about going to the doctor. What does the psychiatrist say? Nothing. Just like, tell me more. I felt him. I think he was looking down my shirt. And, it was something like, if I, the way she worded it, she was like, I feel like if men are looking at me, I'm doing my part. I'm being a good wife. I'm doing it correctly. But this was different. I didn't want Dawn to know about this. So this is where she's feeling a little frisky, and she likes people paying attention to her. And, her mother was always perfect. She's like, don't let them see the brush strokes in your... So her mother was seemingly treated her like you have to be perfect. She talked about she was chubby growing up, and she, one summer she brought in a pattern to home ec to make plus size pajamas, but she was already smaller from swim camp, and now she likes guys looking at her. And as much as, to the point where the thought of the doctor looking at her made her almost excited, to the point where she did not want to tell Dawn about it. And the woman's like, "I love when guys look at me like that." So that was just, you could tell these women are trapped housewives who will just sit there and wait for their husbands to come home. And that's who Betty is, even though her doctor says you're basically, you have the childlike. And I think Don took that to heart, and he's like, "What's wrong with you?" And he was disrespecting her. I mean, look, I almost want to say that, gee, how much action happened in this episode? But I've been talking for almost 25 minutes, just nonstop. No notes in front of me. I'm sitting on the back porch. There's grasshoppers, cackling in the wind. And I think I covered just about everything in this episode. Pete, disenchanted. Roger, disenchanted. Don, I don't know. Everyone is disenchanted, and everyone is depressed, and everyone is covering everything with buying guns, smoking, or martinis. And I got to tell you, sometimes you can because my parents smoked growing up, so I have that sense of what it smelled like. Or just when I was a kid growing up, smoking in restaurants, you just had that thing, or if you're in a bar, and you could just kind of smell it. There's so much smoke going on in these meetings and these restaurants, and it's just like you can almost taste it. And it's kind of a gross taste, but it's also a nostalgic taste. I don't know. It's something just that I find, I want to say visceral or real. I don't know, but it's like, man, I want a cigarette and I want a martini right now, and I don't really drink that much, and I don't smoke. But that's what this show does to me. I bring it up at work sometimes. It's like, can I start smoking in the office? I just want to smoke, and I was going to walk in and sit on a desk in the office and be like, all right, what's going on here? Just like being a complete asshole. I want to start wearing 3-piece suits to work. And I'm 10 years behind everyone else. Everyone else was doing this in 2007, 2008. This episode came out 11 years ago. And I'm finally catching up. I'm finally understanding what it means to be a Mad Men fan. Yeah, I think that's it. I think I've rambled on long enough. So let me just give you the once over if you're a first time listener and you want to go back and listen to my old episodes. Now, this podcast is available on iTunes. It's available on Stitcher. It's available on TuneIn, Google Play Music. And now it's available on Anchor. Now, what's Anchor? Anchor is a website podcast service that basically does your podcast for you. I could be recording right through the Anchor app right now. I'm not. I do it a little differently. I upload my audio to Anchor. And they take care of the rest. They host my podcast. They allow me to kind of create the feed. And I took everything. So everybody who subscribed to the podcast already, this should be seamless. You shouldn't notice anything. But going forward, you're technically downloading your podcast from a new place. You just don't know it. It doesn't matter. But for me, it looked like a cool, easy, more user-friendly. I like to see the stats. And free. That's the most exciting thing of all. It's free. So you can find me there at anchor.fm/mademan. If you have the Anchor app, you can listen to me directly through there, or you can subscribe through whatever podcast app you want. But I wanted to bring up Anchor because this is the first episode I've done since switching everything over to Anchor. Now, just because everything's over at Anchor really doesn't matter before, because you didn't know where things were hosted last time. My website's still fansnotexperts.com. The official website is fansnotexperts.com/mademan. The Twitter account is still at mademanpod. The Facebook is still Fans Not Experts. All that still exists. It's just a new place where I put all my audio and you can find it. And that's how you're listening to this right now. I'm rambling. It is now very late. The crickets are I think they're organizing and they're about to attack. I need to go to bed. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for subscribing. Tell a friend, make a new friend, and tell him or her. Make an enemy. In fact, roll down your window right now. And I said roll down. I didn't say open your window. I said roll down your window, because I'm still in the 60s and you have an automatic crank to roll down your window. Turn up your radio. And when a guy comes over, sell you oranges or spray paint. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about anymore. Just tell him about the podcast you listen to. He's like, hey man, what do you listen to? I'm listening to Made Man. And they'll be like, what's that? And then, I'm rambling. I don't care. I'm going to bed. I just want to thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. And thank you for following me as I make this journey to become the Made Man, or a Made Man. I don't know. Good night.
Fans Not Experts.